Welcome to the Goffstown Select Board meeting, February 9th, 2026. This is a regular scheduled meeting. First of all, would you please all join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First up is the acceptance and correction of minutes of 1/27/26, public and non-public.
I'll make a motion, we accept the minutes of 1/27/26, public and non-public minutes with corrections if need be.
Second.
Motion by Mark, seconded by Jim. Any discussion, questions? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining, motion carries. Announcements, anybody have any announcements? I have none. Seeing none, is there anybody here for public comment? Our public comment is, for those that don't know, is limited to 3 minutes, so feel free. We've got 3.
All right. Good evening, Andrew Cataract, 22 West Union Street. Talking to agenda item number 5, meeting with the Executive Counselor. I'm a member of the Goffstown River Advisory Committee, a member of the Piscataquag River Local Advisory Committee, and an abutter to the Hadley Falls Dam. But tonight, I want to just speak as a resident of Goffstown and as a member of the community. I want to thank the Select Board for having the ARM grant on the discussion for tonight's agenda, and I also want to thank Councillor Stephen and for his leadership in bringing the stakeholders together to discuss the removal of the Hadley Falls Dam and for keeping Goffstown in mind as to what's best for Goffstown. I also want to thank Corey Clark and the Commissioner of DES for being here and other state officials. The willingness for everybody to engage in the discussion around the Hadley Falls Dam is really important. I recognize that the Hadley Falls Dam will be removed. Given that reality, the question before us is no longer whether the dam will be removed, but how will Goffstown respond and how will we move together. The Hadley Falls Dam and the impound it creates is not an incidental feature in our town. It's a visual and cultural centerpiece of our village. It's the endpoint of the rail trail. It's the setting for the community events. It's the defining element of our downtown. It's a shared public space that contributes to the community and to the economy of Goffstown. It's true, I understand, the town doesn't own the dam, and we don't have the resources to repair it. But those facts shouldn't underscore the importance of leadership and coordinated action. This moment calls for a forward-looking approach that seeks the best possible outcome for Goffstown rather than simply accepting a single path and moving forward. Leadership now means advocating for Goffstown's interests, working constructively with the state, and ensuring that the outcomes of this removal leaves our community no worse off and hopefully even better. The Select Board has taken an important step by creating the Goffstown River Advisory Committee, which I'm a member of. That committee provides valuable insight and recommendations to the Select Board, but it's really only advisory in nature. And so the authority to act, to prioritize, and allocate resources ultimately rests with the Select Board. I encourage the Select Board to continue leading by dedicating the appropriate resources, empowering staff, and working closely with the partners, state partners, to ensure that the removal of the Hadley Falls Dam does not result in an irreversible loss to Goffstown's community character, economy, and sense of place. The Hadley Falls Dam will be removed. I understand that. What remains, though, and how it serves Goffstown into the future will be shaped by the leadership shown at meetings like this, and especially tonight. So, thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Is there anybody else?
There's a signing sheet, John said he was next to him after John.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Go
John?
Go ahead.
Okay, all right. I'm Barbara Schultz, 11 Honeysuckle Lane. I also am on the River Advisory Council with Andy, but I am here speaking for myself. I am glad the ARM grant was awarded, which was unanimously supported by the Select Board at the time of the state application, and the state can now move forward with a controlled deconstruction. I have great confidence. Corey has met with us many, many times. He hears our concerns, and I am confident that he and the people he works with will continue to do so. I just want to also say that I appreciate this time for the community to come together and the conversation that will be held subsequently to this. with the parties involved, although I hope we are not missing the very important input of the fish biologists and the river people. I look forward to the work that the state will do with the ARM funding to restore the river. And importantly, I think we have to remember that there's a safety factor, and the state is working to keep the community safe and the members and their property safe. And I also don't want to make light of the fact that a river ecosystem restored to its natural state will be quite beautiful. I have one question. A high hazard dam is defined by the risk to loss of life, not necessarily that the dam is going to fail. But should the dam fail before the state does its work or starts to its work, who, if anyone, is responsible for the damage and the cleanup that might result from that? And I don't expect you to answer that right now. I just wanted to throw that question out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Somebody else? Public comment, come on up. State your name and address.
Hi, I'm Dia Stolnitz at 14 Mill Street in Goffstown. Thank you for welcoming public comments, and to all here, attendees and those listening who care about Goffstown. Thanks to the Select Board for including the removal of Hadley Falls Dam on tonight's agenda. A very special thank you to Councilor Stephen for asking to discuss this with the Select Board, inviting other officials to learn more, and being here to help Goffstown move forward smartly with the removal of the dam, which we now know will happen. And of course, a great thanks to Corey Clark, who came to see the dam earlier today, and all other officials for coming to provide an update and speak directly with us. My home is an 1883 grist mill along the river and on top of Hadley Falls Dam. I am honored to be its caretaker now and for the last 30+ years. I am here as a long-term resident and community member of Goffstown. I sit on the Goffstown River Advisory Committee with others, but not presenting them tonight. My mill house will be fine, as I have been assured by Corey that the removal will be brilliantly engineered and all will be safe and sound around my home. I'm concerned for Goffstown, and I want to help and be proactive so the dam's removal will benefit and even improve the town as we know it. We need to honor Goffstown's legacy and ensure its history, beauty, uniqueness, environment, and economy will be preserved and ideally enhanced, with forward thinking and vision for the town's future. A perfect time to act. This is what I'd like to ask for consideration for discussion. How can we help? How can we, Goffstown, help? As Select Board and committee members, as residents and others, what does New Hampshire DES need from us? What input should we seek? Historical preservation, conservation, etc.? Who else should we collaborate with? Who is best to lead this and create the scope of a long and short-term plan for Goffstown? I understand this grant does not cover beautification after the dam is removed. The state knows what it needs to do. What can we do? Fundraise, create a pond where Mill Pond is now with new vegetation, make a wildlife or historical dam lookout, etc., etc. Though so sad to see the dam go, I appreciate that New Hampshire DES is working to keep our community safe and the river healthy. Now, how can we work together to turn facts, ideas, goals, must-haves, and limited resources into physical reality, and align our thoughts and preferences into actionable and intentional best steps, rather than simple acceptance or passive waiting. Thank you for listening, for a productive discussion, and for your commitment to help.
Thank you, dear. Anybody else here for public comment? Seeing none, I'll close the public comment. I think the way that I'd like to handle this meeting tonight is I'm going to have Corey Clark come up from DES and give us a little bit of a presentation on exactly what the plan is. And then Executive Councilor John Stevens, if you have some people here with you, introduce them and we'll have a discussion. That work for all of you?
Come up with Corey.
Yep, come right up with Corey. And you're going to be using this, right, Corey?
Yes.
All right. Mark, you want to grab that?
Well, there's another, it's going to be mirrored on the TV on the side as well, so you don't have to take the lights off.
iPad is not working up there.
Yep.
Looks like you're on both screens now.
All set, Corey.
Yeah, so I'll just kick us off. I'm the Assistant Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Services, and for the record, I have Corey Clark here, as you mentioned with me. He's the Chief Engineer of our Dam Bureau. We're here to give you a presentation on what the future of this site looks like, and we're incredibly excited about how we can partner with the community to make sure that we're addressing any concerns that you might have. But obviously, there are some limitations with the ARM fund and how those funds can be used. We want to ensure that we're, to the best of our ability, addressing your concerns and making sure that folks feel comfortable with this transition. And I think there's some opportunity there to turn this into a really great project for the town. We're happy and thankful that you supported the ARM grant proposal. And that's, I think that's gonna go a long way to save both the state a lot of money and also turn this into a great opportunity for the town. This is not a unique problem to Goffstown. Goffstown is one of many state-owned dams and high hazard, in poor condition state-owned dams that we have that we are targeting for either removal or some sort of rehabilitation. We're targeting removal at this site for many reasons, as Corey will get into, but it's a statewide problem, and we intend to take this sort of approach as we move through each community, in ensuring community input and making sure that we're trying to address your concerns to the best of our ability. So I don't know, Corey, do you want to kind of go into that?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Adam. So, once again, for the record, Corey Clark, Chief Engineer at the Dam Bureau at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. And so I'll go through a presentation here, and I'll certainly send it along to you, Derek, so you can distribute it to the community and put it on the website as well. So, kicking things off here, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time tonight. There it goes. There's a little bit of delay. Sorry about that. All right, so a little bit of time just talking about what is the ARM program. And so the ARM program is essentially it's an in-lieu fee mitigation program in which essentially developers or those, whether it's government entities or other entities, working on various projects, if they are impacting wetlands and over a certain square footage of wetlands or stream channels, they have to offset those impacts. So they can either offset those impacts by providing additional wetlands or some sort of conservation, or they can pay into what we call the ARM fund. And so you can see here that under these various statutes, it's actually a federal system, so it's federally done by Army Corps of Engineers, and DES actually administers the program for New Hampshire through the ARM fund program. And you can see here on the chart on the right, basically in March of 2025, what was in for each different region. So the state's broken up into these various regions in which if you have a project within that region and you have to pay into the ARM fund, that's basically the balance for that particular area. So you can see here where we are in the Merrimack River corridor, there's about 4.5 million. That is much larger than several of the other different areas, likely because of a lot of development. And some of that actually is probably because of the 93 expansion and the amount of work that DOT had to do in the wetland impacts that happened as part of that project. So what can you use the ARM fund for? So they get this pot of money through these various impacts of wetlands. Well, their goals are to offset those impacts. And so they actually have a program in which you can apply for funding if you meet certain criteria. And so some of the criteria are shown right here. So restoration. If you have a project that actually increases the acreage of a wetland complex, you can apply for these mitigation funds, pull out of that pool of money for your project. You can do things such as enhancement, where you may have a wetland complex that if we actually do something different within that wetland complex, it's going to become more beneficial to the ecological environment of that area. You can establish, you can create all new wetlands, or you can actually do preservation. So if you have a large tract of land that has a lot of wetlands on that, you can preserve that and actually put it through conservation easement so it's preserved in perpetuity to help basically get those wetland benefits. However, there are some key criteria for ARM funded projects. Obviously, we have to prioritize the conservation, restoration, and connectivity of wetland complexes through different areas. At the end of the day, there's a running tally of wetland loss and stream loss. Ultimately, the goal is try to restore those wetland complexes, that stream connectivity. So a net gain is part of it. We want to make sure that these things are self-sustaining. So basically, these restoration projects or wetland creation projects are self-sustaining, very little maintenance involved. It's preserved in perpetuity, so that way that wetland complex can function on its own accord naturally. There's a period of performance after every project for 5 years. We have to provide various, basically, management plans of how this is all going to take part, what exactly is going to be restored, how's that going to be monitored and maintained in the future, and ultimately, we have to meet any state and federal requirements as part of this. So that's a bit of the background on ARM, and so, as the Select Board is well aware, we applied for funding. And at that time, we applied for the $4.5 million. There have been additional funds that have come into the Merrimack watershed area since that time. So there are a couple other projects that were also looked at as part of the application process, which I'll get to in a minute. But you can see here that we're looking to do stream credits, about 5,000, almost 5,500 feet of stream credits. That's also actually accounted for. You look at both banks of the stream, not just the single square footage in the center, and then we're looking at restoring the wetland complexes, really focusing primarily on the wetland complex from Main Street Bridge down to the existing dam, restoring that into from an open body of water wetland complex into a riverine complex with floodplain enhancements as well. And a little bit more information on that down below. You can see that 2,800 feet of linear stream enhancement, and along with the connectivity and channel reconstruction from Main Street Bridge down to the dam itself. So, jumping into, everybody I believe is pretty familiar with this, but these are the 3 dams that New Hampshire owns on the Piscataquag River that greatly impact the town of Goffstown. And tonight we are talking about Hadley Falls Dam, but we're going to hear also some talk about Greg's Falls Dam, particularly Glen Lake, and how will this dam removal impact Glen Lake. And then ultimately we have Kelly's Falls Dam down on the Maskey Lake, right on the border of Goffstown and Manchester. And so jumping into the background of Hadley Falls Dam, I think a lot of you are familiar with this, but for those of you who are not, dam was built roughly over 100 years ago. The state took over ownership from the town of Goffstown in 1968, and I believe the town took over ownership just prior to that from a private entity, and then basically turned it over to the state. Between the 1980s and 2007, hydropower was generated at the facility. It's a relatively small facility, but hydropower was generated there. The state leased the dam. The powerhouse is not owned by the state, but that was leased separately for hydropower generation. As such, there is a Federal Energy Regulatory Commission license on the dam because they oversee all hydropower in the state. And so, as part of us maintaining that license, even though we weren't generating there in 2020, FERC required us to look at stability of the dam. We found that the dam was likely unstable, particularly at some of the abutments tying into the buildings. And so, shortly thereafter, FERC sent us a letter in 2023 stating that basically come up with a plan to either restart hydro there or surrender the license. It's been almost 15 years at this point since the state has generated at the facility, and something has to happen. And so with that, the state decided the best course of action for this facility was to actually surrender the license and remove the dam. And that was decided in 2023. And also at the same time, we were looking at a holistic grant opportunity through NOAA, in which we have $6.5 million for removal of Hadley Falls Dam, with a bunch of different public improvements around the site, along with about 13.3 for a fish ladder down at Kelly's Falls to really get the connectivity all the way from the main stem of the Merrimack River up through the Piscataqua River watershed. Unfortunately, that grant was denied. The same year, we also applied for another grant through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for $4 million for Hadley Falls. That was also denied. And then in 2024, we were basically looking at, okay, it looks like the state itself, we are going to have to come up with the funding through our own means, primarily through capital appropriation, to do something with this site. So we dove a little bit deeper into the alternatives analysis. How much will it cost to remove it with restoration? How much will it cost to actually replace the dam, possibly replace the dam with a fishway? And we saw basically costs ranging from about $2 million for removal with no restoration to about $10 million for full dam replacement with fishway. And in 2025, we also decided at that time, well, if we're going to move forward with the removal, we're going to have to certainly start honing in on what's in the sediment upstream of the dam. So we started doing that work this past year. So that brings us into really the ARM funding component. We started talking with the ARM program in the winter of last year, and in May of last year, they actually required a preliminary pre-proposal. We submitted that. In June, we met with the ARM selection committee, did a tour of the site, and essentially in July, that same committee decided that DES, why don't you put forward a full application for this project? It seems to be viable. In August, we worked with the town and presented our full application for the letter of support, and then in September, we actually applied for the full grant application, about $4.5 million. That followed with another October site visit from the selection committee, and then through November and December, the various decision makers in the process from the ARM perspective sat down and met and decided to ultimately vote to approve the $4.5 million for this project. And so right now, what is in front of Councilor Stephen and the rest of the Executive Council is basically a memorandum of understanding to allow the ARM program to establish that grant for the removal of Hadley Falls for $4.5 million with the Dam Bureau. So that is what is in front of the Governor and Council right now. And moving forward, there are going to be a couple other requests through the Governor Executive Council if we're successful with getting the MOU established, in which we will have to do an accept and spend, basically an accounting exercise in order for us to use the money, and then ultimately we have to establish a contract with our design firm in order to move this project forward into design and everything else. So what happens after that, through 26 and 27, we will be going through the whole design process, at which point I'm looking to, and this could be a different discussion, but looking to sit down with the town of Goffstown through probably a series of work sessions. I don't know if that's through the select board or the Rivers Committee, but really trying to hone in on, what can we do as part of our design process to meet the goals of the town of Goffstown. Winter of 27, going through the contractor bidding and selection, and really in 2027, hopefully going to construction. The reason for that is we have to get that period of performance in there for the 5 years after the fact. And so that period of performance and through the memorandum of understanding, that's what extends it out to 2023, is including that 5 years of period of performance to make sure that we're meeting the goals of the funding as far as restoration. And so just quickly kind of going through Hadley Falls and what we're looking at here, I think everybody's familiar with this site. We have Mill Street and downtown there shaded. And jumping ahead a little bit, these are all conceptual drawings that were part of the ARM fund application, but really what we'll be looking at is kind of a phased approach. The first phase is diving into the site, coming off of Mill Street to access the upstream side of the dam. You can see the shaded area. That is the former forebay going into the powerhouse that DES does own, and we'll have to address that, and I'll get to that in a minute. But really focusing on removing that right-hand portion of the dam, dealing with sediments upstream, that's what the other hatched area is all about, dealing with sediments in that location. And then once that is completed, actually before jumping into it, there was some questions about, what exactly is gonna be removed in the impoundment. So Hadley Falls Dam is gonna be removed in its entirety. These are notes taken directly from those design documents. And so we'll remove the concrete portion of the dam, basically between the two buildings. There are remnants of a timber crib dam that was there prior to the existing dam built in the 1920s. That will also be removed. And there's a lot of boulders and debris in there that also will all be removed as part of that. Going on at the same time, we're going to be having to work with the town of Goffstown to replace the two dry hydrants that now rely on the impoundment upstream of the dam. Our goal is to basically tap into either the water line on Mill Street or tap into the water line on Main Street to basically provide hydrants in lieu of those two dry hydrants. So the cost of that will be rolled in as part of this project, and that is something that's going to be covered as part of our work out there. So in this photo taken in the mid-90s, when some restoration work was being done on the dam, you can see here, that's that timber crib dam that I talked about earlier, shown there on the left, and you can see a lot of the boulders there. It's a little hard to discern what exactly is bedrock and what exactly is boulders, because you see a lot of the exposed bedrock downstream of the dam that you can see there today. What is bedrock on the upstream side is yet to be known. But we'll certainly be working on removing those boulders and either reusing those on site as part of the habitat restoration or removing those from the site
Corey,
altogether.
do you know if the lower portion and edge, I looked at that, but I didn't have the blow up of this side. Was that concrete that was poured in there and that's a wrap that was put in?
Yeah, so what they're doing right here is this is all basically a concrete cast monolith portion, and
Before the structure upgrade, is that a concrete and then there was a wrap dump before you hit the dam? So if you go upgrade
this is actually the wooden timber crib dam.
that is.
That was
Okay, that's
like-
what I didn't know.
Yeah, that was likely the dam that was in place prior to
So
the concrete dam
is
being
it safe
built.
to assume that there's a depth to that of at least 4 feet for cribbing?
I would think so, yes, because they have to tie the cribbing into something.
So it should be about the same elevation as the bedrock somewhat being
I
sloping down.
would think so, yes. I guess yet to be unknown is like this right here, is that actually a piece of bedrock that's exposed that they use to help bolster the timber crib dam? Questions that will be answered, once we get into the
Boards.
the nitty gritty out there and
Sorry
looking
to
at
disturb
things.
you, I just need.
No, that's fine. This is another angle. You can see that timber crib dam a lot better. In this photo right here, it's actually at a different angle coming off from the existing dam out there. And so that will be removed. This other debris that you see here will also be removed. But unfortunately, that's all we really have to go on as far as what is below the water surface today. We haven't drawn down the impoundment, nor do we have any plans to do so immediately to really hone in on things. So this spring, we'll certainly jump into the informational gathering process as much as we can once the ice is off the river. So this right here, this is the former forebay going into the hydro building. One thing that we're going to have to do, so I mentioned earlier, DES does not own this building. This is actually owned by the developer that redeveloped the mill property there. And so our goal is to basically build a new concrete wall upstream that really seals off all that. So if there's ever high flows in the river or anything else, it's not going to be to the detriment of these buildings. This also provides an opportunity when this forebay basically gets filled in of some kind of patio, possibly working with the mill owner. Do they want, I know they've done work out there for public amenities. Do they want to continue to extend that to allow the public to come out here? That's all part of that process and part of the discussions moving forward. What do we do with this former forebay moving ahead? But one thing we are going to do is this retaining wall, if you will, to help divert flows back in the river once the spillway is removed. And so this is just another angle of looking at that. That wall will essentially run right here. You can see the buoy line right here. And then this whole area will then be filled in, and essentially this will become a new platform. And so how that gets used in the future is certainly something to discuss. Now, moving on kind of to phase 2, once we've kind of completed everything on this side, then we certainly have to focus on the other side. Once again, we're still using the same access way. However, now, because this has all been mitigated and returned to the natural river, the river will be diverted through here. I should have mentioned previously, the river will actually go through underneath Dia's house right now during the first phase of the process, because we have a former low-level gate over here in which the water actually fed that building when it was a mill building, and so the river will go through there during the first phase of the project, and then the second phase will be focusing on removing that, and once again building another wall, just like on the other side, to protect Dia's house. And so the same thing over here, we'll be tying that wall in upstream, kind of where that river access location, that dry hydrant's located about right here. So we'll be tying that wall in there, and once again, there's a potential discussion here of how to reuse that area right here that then becomes filled in behind that wall. This is just another aerial view of that. You can see this line right here, just by coincidence, kind of shows where that wall is going to go. This is that former low-level outlet to drain the pond that I previously mentioned. So that will all be sealed up and rendered unusable as part of this project. And basically, this concrete deterioration that you see here adjacent to the building will also be addressed as part of this project. So we talked a little bit about active and passive restoration. Obviously, I spoke at length about what we're planning on doing down between Main Street Bridge and down here. That's where the sediment will be getting removed and reworked, and really trying to get the river back into a natural configuration. Upstream of the bridge, we're hoping to do a lot more passive restoration. What that means is basically you will lower the impoundment and you allow it to come back naturally. A lot of times you try to get in there with equipment and you end up doing more harm than what will actually happen naturally. Because a lot of what we find in all these areas that are currently underwater, in those overbank areas, are actually dormant seeds that will come back naturally once the river is removed. One thing we have to address is invasive species. So if there are invasive species up there, we will have to address that, likely mechanically. But hopefully, a lot of that can come back naturally with natural wetland vegetation and stream bank vegetation. So I know there's been a lot of questions of, what is in this sediment. So I mentioned earlier this year, we did look at. Basically we had to start somewhere, so we just started with, we know there's a lot of sediment on this area that I spoke about earlier about removing that. And what we found is there are some metals that are present in that sediment, along with some semi-volatile organic compounds. They're at levels that are above the lower standard for ecological risk, so that is aquatic organisms, mussels, that sort of thing. But below, essentially, the human health risk. The only exception to that is arsenic, which unfortunately here in New Hampshire is very high naturally occurring, so we have to do a little bit more background on that. But we know, what I'm getting is, we know we're going to have to do some mitigation here. Either there's a couple different avenues we can take. We can either remove it all, or if we can leave it in place and allow it to basically, if upland vegetation is going to be reestablished there, that is going to lock that into place anyways. The other thing we have to look at is what is already downstream in Glen Lake. So if by chance anything does move through the site, the last thing we want to do is impact Glen Lake, so we have to look at what's already in the sediments down there. So this is just the first snapshot. The next phase is moving downstream and upstream to get a better sense of what exactly is in this. One thing, I spoke with the engineering consultants that worked on this today, and they said, through the main stem of the river, right through here, it's a really sandy bottom, and they're not finding the same levels of particularly the volatile organic compounds. I will say the likely cause of that is when the railroad bridge burnt, and a lot of that debris ended up in there. So a lot of those constituents that you see there are typical of what you find in wood preservatives from the 1800s and 1900s.
Is that the reason for the active wetland mitigation at that location as opposed to the passive further upstream?
Well, I think it's just there's a larger volume of sediment that's been deposited there as a direct result of the dam. So as, the last thing, even if it wasn't contaminated, the last thing we would want is the river to start meandering through there and causing head cuts, and basically sediment, falling on its own into the river. And so we have to manage that regardless, as part of this.
So is the state's answer, because the state owns this dam and removes this dam, it's gonna remove the liability of the dam and the sediment that's
Correct.
within it?
Yeah, correct.
That
Yep.
answers the question that was addressed earlier.
Yep, so obviously, we don't want to cause any undue harm by removing this dam, and whether or not the contaminants are contaminated or not, even just the turbidity that's caused as the sediment enters back into the river, we want to try to avoid that as much as possible. One thing I will say is we also tested for volatile organic compounds, likely those more found in gasoline and diesel fuel, PCBs, pesticides, and herbicides, and none of that was detected above the non-detect limit. So, not surprised, a lot of dam removals have this. Right now, the ARM program is actually working, and through various other partners and funding over in Gonick, New Hampshire, and that site has a higher level of contamination where they're actually doing levels of effort as part of a dam removal to make sure that those sediments stay in place. So there are measures you can do through natural barriers in the river system to make sure that those sediments stay where they are. And this also helps, I know there's also discussions about basically impacts in making sure that we can preserve all this wetland that we're creating down the road. So this black line right here shows basically the flowage that was deeded to DES as part of the dam as well. That flowage stays in place even after the dam is removed. And so we already have that ability to basically limit development within that flowage, but also this paints a little bit of a picture of where water surface elevations might be impacted. This flowage, however, is about 2 feet higher than the current elevation, because this goes with the flashboards that were on the dam at one time that are no longer there. So likely today, you'll only see impacts up to here. These impacts further upstream already took place when those flashboards were removed years ago.
So is your flowage to the outer purple?
No, the outer purple,
Or
that
the
is
black?
the black. The outer purple is actually the FEMA floodplain for this area. And so one thing that we're thinking too is as we dive into this, there might be more of a natural constriction here anyways that helps with that passive restoration. The river, in theory, kind of wants to meander up here anyways, move back and forth in a natural fashion, and it might go back into that if there's some kind of, what we found on other dam removals is as you move upstream, right now it's underwater, but there could be a bedrock feature that then becomes kind of the control point for water elevation.
So
moving
your
upstream.
riparian flowage is based upon the location of the river as it happens by accretion and not avulsion, as it occurs over time. Wherever that river goes, the state maintains flowage for it.
The state maintains flowage to a certain elevation, regardless of where
Just the elevation.
Just the
Okay.
elevation. So you take that elevation, everything down from that elevation is our, and that's a typical, in order for any mill to be built, whether it's on a lake or a river system, the owners, when they first initially set this up, is they have to have flowage. So what that is it's the right to flow other people's property. A lot like a transmission line easement as well. So the state doesn't own the area in fee, it has flowage on that, on private property owners abutting the stream. And so right now, I just wanted to jump into this real quick, hopefully this works all right. And so while this dam is Kelly's Falls Dam, I'm gonna jump upstream a little bit, and this will help answer any particular questions, I believe. So here we are at Hadley Falls Dam. As you can see here, here's that right abutment that I was discussing earlier. Obviously, making sure that we are not degrading the foundation of this building at all, so that's going to have to be addressed. This is where that one wall is going. The dam removal is going to be removing all of this concrete that we see here, moving to the other side of the river, all the way over there, and once again, building a new concrete wall right here, and basically filling in this 4-bay area. And so I know there's been questions about this is jumping to another view of, what would this possibly look like once the dam is removed? Well, as you can see here, here's all the natural bedrock that's already out on site. We know that there's a deep channel here and a deep channel here. So as that dam is removed, this will likely become some kind of bedrock island, possibly, with the natural river channel either moving through here or through here, yet to be known. But how this bedrock moves upstream is also yet to be known. So here's some of that where that sediment was. You can see it's relatively shallow here. So is that sediment on top of bedrock and relatively shallow? Are we just going to remove it all down to bedrock? Or are we going to stabilize it in place? Yet to be known. We talked about a couple of public access points. You can see here. Here's one public access point right here. That will be enhanced. You can see all this, well, essentially purple loosestrife and invasive species along here. That will be dealt with. And then moving upstream, we have this, you can see this, this person right here at the other public access point. So one of the key things that I really want to work with the town of Goffstown is, as I know there's been talk about doing a new pedestrian bridge across where the former railroad bridge was, but really enhancing the experience from a pedestrian perspective as they move down Mill Street. So if they're at Rotary Park, what can we do there to allow them to see interpretively what Mill Pond used to be? Potentially there's an option there where we can have some kind of view corridor where they can see what the railroad bridge used to look like as part of the dam and the whole complex. I know as part of the dam removal that took place in Exeter, I was hoping to get over this weekend. Unfortunately, I did not. But in the town library, there's a big picture window where they've actually set it up so that if you walk up to that window, you can see what the dam used to look like in front of the library from that perspective. Similar to like the old man viewing corridor that they have up there off of I-93. And so a little bit more just on what we might see see this turn into. If you look downstream, obviously Glen Lake really abuts almost all the way up. This is the town utility infrastructure crossing, but Glen Lake is really kind of where my cursor is. But you can see down here there's a lot of exposed bedrock. You have some of this floodplain vegetation, mature upland growth moving through here. And so really that's kind of the goal of the objective, is to if that is what it looks like up through Mill Pond, is to bring that corridor all the way up through so that the public can benefit from having restoration similar looking like this all the way up through, really moving up through the site and all the way up to Main Street and then beyond. And so that's really what I have at this point in time. Once we get through these approvals and get our contracts in place, that's once again where I'm really hoping to sit down, bring in our engineering consultant at that time so we can really have some good dialogue and discussions with the town as to what can we do here.
You all set?
I'm all set, thank you.
Before we leave, I'm going to let everybody here, if they have any questions, to start with Richard. Do you have any questions, Richard? For Corey? Then we're going to be talking to Council, Mr. Stevens about his portion.
Yeah, no, I don't think I have any questions for you, Corey.
Josh?
Yeah, Corey, I think the last time you were here, we talked about the grant, and part of the grant was we were supporting that because we did want to beautify the area. Because if I remember correctly, you roughly had $10 million in budget every year to remove dams and basically fix some of the impacts along the river.
Yeah.
So I saw that the project is 4.8, you're getting 4.5, did I read that correctly?
Yep.
So what additional things are we talking about here, and where are you dipping into that additional $10 million in budget to help us?
So the 4.8, really to get us to where we are today through the different alternatives analyses and the studies that we've done, the sedimentation, that's that additional $300,000 that's been spent already to date to get us where we are today. One thing that we do have to do as part of this, because there is still a federal hydropower license with this, is we have to surrender that license through FERC. That is not something that will be supported by the ARM grant. So I will be using capital money to do that out of the $10 million that I have for dams all throughout the state. that, I'll be using that to move through that surrender process with FERC to basically get the hydropower license away from this site. And if there's other items that either are outside the scope of what ARM can support, whether that's infrastructure in Mill Street that, we don't know at this time, that may come up, that will be addressed through that capital appropriation as well, if that answers your question.
It does to a point. It doesn't sound like you have an accurate estimate of what that cost is going to be on those items that you mentioned.
No, not yet, no. It's really, as we dive into it and we start answering some of the unknowns, that's when we'll know more. I do have a pretty good handle on the surrender piece. I believe that's gonna be somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 to do that. We're going through a similar process up at Squam Lake. And so we have a pretty good handle on that. But once again, FERC is gonna have to review what we're doing here. There's no indications that FERC is gonna have any issues with this, but that is also some unknowns as part of this process too.
Yeah, a lot of those all still sound very functional, nothing around beautification and trying to pull back some of the area, because we use this quite heavily every year, as you know, for the Pumpkin Regatta. So I'm just curious how the state is thinking about helping us improve this and keep some of the life here in town.
Yeah, so right off the bat, a couple of things, I spoke about the sediment, we gotta deal with that. But also like the invasive species. All along Mill Street, there's invasive species, purple loosestrife. I know there's also Japanese knotweed on the other side, near where the rail trail terminates. So addressing those to make sure that that doesn't become an issue out here is something that we're certainly going to have to do. The other thing that we're going to have to do is lots of plantings out there. So one thing, certainly between the current dam and up through Main Street, is there's going to be a lot of, basically as you tier and you try to recreate that natural bench, is you're doing a lot of planting. So that usually includes what they call live stakes. So you're actually taking wetland plants, usually wooded wetland plants, staking those out so they take hold, along with other natural vegetation. That all is really, as long as we're meeting the goals of the ARM program, then that is certainly a discussion to have with Goffstown. What do we want to have here? As long as we're hitting the natural plantings, what do we want to have here so that it is a good visual corridor as you come down Mill Street and see it out there. Once we know more about how that river's going to meander, what is it going to look like? Are there bedrock outcroppings where the people accessing through those two public access points can access the bedrock? Similar to what we see downstream. I know some of the abutters access that bedrock down there already. So unfortunately, I don't have the answers to that, but that's where I'm hoping to dive into during these work sessions and try to answer some of those.
Jim?
I'm going to ask you the same question I always ask you. Is anything here going to affect Glen Lake? The level, the water level, people that live along the lake, can they expect to lose their frontage or
Nope.
whatever?
So the water level you see here, really the water level moving completely downstream, this water level that you see down here is going to remain exactly the same. So it's not going to change. Obviously, this water down here as it moves through is controlled by either Glen Lake and the dam at the outlet of Glen Lake, or by, I think there's also a natural kind of a riffle down here as you enter into Glen Lake. So this, what you see here is not going to change. From
Even
Glen
during
Lake.
construction, as far as you can know?
Yep, during construction. And really, since we're, and also because we're accessing everything through the existing impoundment, there really shouldn't be any need other than a little bit of temporary impacts down here, but really it's going to be a small footprint moving downstream that even construction is going to be taking place.
Okay. Thank you.
I think our concern from the beginning has been the aesthetics of when you get done, and I think that when that comes to that point, and how do we know you're gonna have enough money to do anything that needs to be done on the sides, plantings, things like that, and you're not sure yet how much it's gonna cost to take care of the impediments and stuff that
Yeah.
you found?
Yeah. So, not knowing what the final cost is actually going to be, I don't have an answer until we dive into these things and try to get some of these things answered through that design process. Ultimately, the state is committed to, we are going to be working through this, and particularly if we have $4.5 million of ARM funding, that is almost half of our capital allotment. So we're gonna do what we can, even if that means tapping into that capital allotment to pull this to the finish line. We will do what we need to do to make sure that it is a successful project.
So you're not gonna throw your hands up and say, hey, we're out of money.
Well, I mean, if we're using the ARM fund money to do that, then we'll have to pay back the ARM fund if we don't get to the finish line anyways.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're invested in it fully.
And I'll just say too, we want to work with the town. A lot of what we need to do has to be ARM fund eligible, but we will work with you and make sure that we try and fit what your visions are into what that looks like. And so I don't know if that's a different way of saying what you said, but we want to make sure that you have input in this.
I just think it's important for everybody to know that we're not gonna be left out in the cold. And no, we're not taking questions, I'm sorry.
Okay.
We're not gonna be left out in the cold if you come up a few bucks short, that's all.
Absolutely, no, and
Mark, you got any questions?
The material that's going to be removed from that dam, where will that be taken? Will it stay in our landfill, or will you guys take it away?
Yet to be known as we dive into, what exactly is in it, what concentrations, and basically reuse processes. Ideally, what's always the best is like if you can reuse it on site and make sure it stays in place through engineering controls, that's always the best. It won't move downstream, it's gonna stay in place, we're not, spending funding to move it to a landfill facility, and it doesn't become a concern for the community. So, don't know yet on the answer on that, we'll find out more as we dive in.
Awesome,
Thank you.
thank you. I think it's time now to hear from Executive Council John Steven. And you brought somebody with you, I didn't get a chance to introduce him.
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. John Steven, Executive Council of your district. And it's a privilege and honor to be here. The only reason I wanted to be here to take a lot of notes because it's very rare at the council table. I see a number of ARM requests that come in all the time. And when it's usually in the district that I represent, I like to be actively involved. And I want to make sure that the town is given the top priority here in terms of not just using the ARM dollars, but what happens next. I think Joshua's question is an excellent question. Jim's question about Glen Lake is a question I asked the commissioner a while back. Meeting with Dia, I came down, and also meeting with Andrew and understanding the impacts down even through New Boston, not even in my district. It's important to the state. This is a beautiful community. As a county prosecutor of Hillsborough, my first years back when Jim was in Manchester, and we worked together on a lot of things. I represented this town. I was the prosecutor of the crimes in this town. I love Goffstown, and I want to make sure there was a couple issues that I heard, and I know the commissioner mentioned about beatification and other issues. We just can't leave the town hanging, and we need to do it the right way. And there's dialogue, which is important to me, and collaboration. John O'Neill is an expert who I went to University of New Hampshire with, and John is the one that helps me on the council with all the engineering and technical issues involving environmental services. But I also work closely with the Department of Historical Affairs or Cultural and Historical Affairs, which I think Ben said he was going to be here tonight. Yeah, Ben's in the back, and he can probably address, I'd like him to say a few words as well. Because along the way, in speaking to the Commissioner Crapo, Adam has been excellent on all the constituent issues I've had in environmental services. And they're going to be intimately involved with the town. That's important to me. And next week, I believe, or this week, actually, Wednesday, we'll probably be seeing at our meeting the MOU. The start of the ARM process is the MOU to accept it. And then the acceptance of the funds that go into the budget is the next order. Now, we vote on that, so we can always hold that up at any time if the town's concerned. We can then table the item. We can have demand further discussion along the way. If there's issues, we can at every one of our council meetings ask the commissioner what is going on with the Goffstown dam removal to make sure everything's moving in the right direction. I'm in constant contact with them. And John is my expert on the council when it comes to these issues. Now, the Department of Historical Affairs, basically Cultural and Historical Affairs, always looks at issues of beatification, but historical prevalence in New Hampshire in every single aspect. Commissioner Crapo is going to be working with Fish and Game as well. There may be some funding available through Fish and Game. There may be some future funding available through Historical Department as well. So I want to continue to monitor this and let you know that I'm not going to go away as well. And so I'm here tonight just to listen, and I just want what's best for this town. I actually was during my first campaign when I met Andrew and heard about this issue, and there wasn't funding. I heard about the $10 million request is what they needed, is what I was told. And we didn't have any dollars. And I went to the commissioner at that time and asked questions, and we have 290 to 300 dams in this state that all need repair or some type of demolition. And we don't have the money for all that. But now we have this grant, and the town's already accepted the process in the beginning. We're moving in the right direction. That's all I see, and I'm here for you all. If you have any concerns, you can always reach me. And again, I'm going to have John O'Neill continue to monitor the issue with the department. And I have full faith in the state of New Hampshire that they will not let you down, but I think there's going to be some need for additional funding. And we just got to watch that closely, and I'm going to keep an eye out for that as well. And there's a lot of different opportunities that come along the way. And I know that these folks working together, and I want to hear from Ben as well. I think you should ask him a few questions. But again, there's going to be a lot of involvement here. And this is, like you saw, 2027 is when the actual construction starts. That's what's planned. And one thing, just my role, we want to be careful not to interrupt the process, because everything seems to take forever in state government. And we want to get this moving, in my opinion. But Ben, I appreciate you being here. You might want to introduce yourself. But if you have questions for John, he's taking some notes, but he's very methodical too. So we're going to work together. And I'm here for the town. And I'm just, again, my role is to make sure that the town gets what it needs from the state of New Hampshire. And I'm
We
going to do
appreciate
whatever I
that, Counselor. Go ahead,
can.
Ben.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you for the invitation to be here tonight. For the record, I'm Ben Wilson. I'm the Director of the Division of Historical Resources. And as Corey and Adam know, really it's until there's a project to be reviewed, we don't get involved. We like to have a heads up and have early information to a project. Obviously, this is just a wonderful example of industrial history that New Hampshire is very proud of. And normally, we're involved in the review of the project from a Section 106 review perspective, and then get involved in the mitigation later on, so that the history of the site can be explained to the general public, and it's a consultative process with the town and with DES, and we work very close together in an excellent way, and we're here to help as well. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Well, we appreciate taking the time to come down and get an eye on the project.
And if I could, Corey mentioned the Exeter project, which I think is a very similar project. And if you all have an opportunity to get over to Exeter to see, what a real wonderful example of this kind of removal. They've done an excellent job, and the mitigation and the celebration of the history of that dam and that river is really, really well done.
How was that funded? Not this way.
I was not involved in that project. I think that was funded through a series of different federal grants, I believe. I'm not sure if ARM was part of that process at that time, but I think it was primarily federal fish passage.
I think you're right.
At that
Yep.
location.
Do you have before and after pictures of that?
We probably do in our database, but I do encourage folks to go.
I think if it's comparable, it'd be good to see that. To understand, because I think it would help with the town too, to understand what the likelihood of what that's going to look like before and after.
We can get some pictures.
That's been brought up before and put out there. Mr. O'Neill, did you have, I saw you have a few questions. Do you have anything else to throw in there, or?
I'm just trying to assess everything to see. I've heard a lot of feedback in visiting the grist mill and with Andrew. So I've been in contact with Corey and Sarah out of your office previously. So at this point, I'll just be fly on the wall a little bit and making some suggestions as we go.
We appreciate that. Make sure they go in our favor.
That's what we're looking for. Thank you.
Jim?
Yeah, just one more time, I know you said that, but if people ask us when we're gonna actually start seeing construction, what do we answer them?
I would say in 2027. If
January or December?
It all certainly depends. I mean, there are some dam removals trying to take place this winter. It's certainly a challenge from many different reasons. But our hope is that at some point in 2027, once we get through the
One more.
process.
Yeah, just kind of extending that since construction wouldn't start until 2027, and we're getting ready to move on the MOU. 4.5 obviously may not be enough as we start to get to 2027. Are there any capital expenditures that you're looking to make ahead of that time, so that way we know we keep everything in budget and on track?
So there are some capital expenditures on other projects that I'm going to be looking at using that 10.5 million. You know, one of the things that actually this project kind of lines up pretty well with the capital appropriation request process, because very shortly we started internally at DES. We start having conversations about what we want to have for capital appropriations in the next biennium. That starts in the summer of 2027. So we start those discussions now. If we, throughout the design process, come to realize, whoa, you know, we're $4 million short on this thing, there will be opportunities that we can work with the legislature to try to get that additional funding in prior to the budget being approved and through the governor's office just before the summer of 2027.
So when would the design process start?
Really as soon as we can get the contracts in place, so hopefully later this spring.
Okay.
If I may,
have
can I
one.
add to that?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Jim.
The budget, that's a great point, because you have some representatives here today, and through the capital budget process, there's also an alternative to bring in some requests. And that's the budget's already being started now for the next biennium. So, at some point, independently, the representatives can work with DES on those items in capital projects. So, that's a great question, and don't lose sight of that fact.
I'm on it. I'm not all over it, so I think we should be on it.
Yeah.
And one more question is, will you be asking for any more grants for this project if something comes up?
Yeah, we will. Yep.
Is there a potential?
Yeah, if something falls into one of the funding pots that you know this could be eligible for, we'll certainly ask for some funding if a problem arises. There are various pots of funding. Corey's more familiar with those for dams specifically, but there are other pots of funding if there is an issue that comes up that we could seek funding for. Right now, we are pretty confident, unless an issue comes up, we feel confident that this will cover it. But as Corey mentioned, there's still a lot of unknowns that could present some problems there. So.
All right, well, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Go
Could I
ahead,
follow
Gordon.
up with a question on the unknowns?
Yes.
Is there been any thought to putting in a phased approach to removal of the dam to kind of eliminate some of those unknowns, eliminate some of the bedrock issues that are up gradient and some of the extent of the sediment, the contaminated sediment?
So I will add, actually, I have a public informational meeting tomorrow in New Durham about another dam removal on the Merrimeeting River. And I had one 2 weeks ago in Alton for another dam removal on the Merrimeeting River. Those dam removals, those dams are built such that we can lower the water surface additionally without removing the dam. And so
You can't here.
it's a little more challenging here. It just isn't configured quite the same way. We might be able to pull it down a
Is
little
that
bit.
because of the bedrock bifurcating?
It's really because the spillway is just one solid mass, where these other sites have basically notches cut into the spillway with stop logs. And so what we're doing at those other sites is we're removing those stop logs and allowing that passive restoration to start all the way upstream. So the exposed banks allow that to start. At the same time that, you know, the sediment, we're not draining it, so the sediment is still staying where it is, behind the dam, but it allows some of that passive restoration to start. As we move forward with this process, there might be an opportunity to essentially, if say we cut a piece out, that will help lower it. It also helps answer a lot of the questions. You know, what is this river going to want to do? And that helps
And
with that
maybe
process.
you could preserve the ARM grant further down the road, if you could get something up front for the safety issue of removing the hazard of some of the water, getting some of these unknowns answered, and giving an idea of whether or not there's potential to adjust some of the arm.
Yeah.
Maybe to a water feature. I know there have been a lot of people that have questioned whether there could be more of a water feature like exists without assaulting too much of the 1.5 acre of wetland mitigation, maybe as wet pools or amphibian type of habitats or something of that nature. Is
Yeah.
that something that could be looked at?
You're welcome back to all these meetings.
That's certainly, and actually, I just quickly want, this is from a different presentation, but this has a number of different dam removals that have taken place over the past couple of years. This is a high hazard dam in Dover that was removed, another adjoining mill complex, actually much more intricate mill complex. This was a privately owned dam as part of that, but you can see here before and after photos. Construction's just wrapping up, so some of that restoration hasn't really taken place yet from a natural perspective, but just jump through here. This is the lower dam at that same location, and you can see here's the dam, and once they removed, this project actually, very similar to the project out here at Hadley Falls, they had to actually encase all of these granite monoliths in concrete. That happened after the project took place. And so that was something that wasn't foreseen that they had to address after the fact. This is another dam removal that took place recently up more in the northern part of the state. A drinking water facility that's no longer needed. This is over in Newington, and you can see here, this dam was removed. This is more of that active restoration where they actually went in and really kind of rebuilt the river channel, regraded all the embankments. You can see the piece of equipment working down there, and this is what it looks like today. This is another dam removal up in the northern part of the state. You can certainly see the restoration here. And this is, I did want to point, this is what made me think of it. This was removed in 2024, but if you see here, see if I can't zoom in a little bit and go over. Oh. These are some of those live plantings that I was talking about. So you can see here, they were trying to basically build a new floodplain bench, allow the river to flow kind of in its normal channel,
Right.
get that natural vegetation established along here, and so when it does come up into flood status, it won't deteriorate this riverbank. But that's what I mean about what we do along Mill Street, particularly in something like this.
Could you back up one slide?
Sure.
Kimball Brook Dam, that's very pleasing. And I'm thinking, can you make something like the River Seine and give me plants along the Goffstown area so that it can be a really, that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, certainly.
All right, again, we thank you all. Oh, sorry, Richard.
No, that's okay. I guess I just wanted to, near the end of your presentation here, ask what level of thinking you've put into contingencies, because you have a lot of unknowns here.
Yeah.
And not everything is going to turn out the way we hope it will, and just in life, it's just a fact of life. So I'm just wondering, if the money's not there, if they're not going to add money to this, what do we do?
Well, eventually, certainly if we dive into this and there's issues that budget keeps growing and growing and growing, at some point there is a tipping in which keeping the dam is cheaper than removing the dam. And ultimately, that may come out of this process. Unfortunately, it takes a level of effort to answer those questions. But, if we run into, highly contaminated sediment that, cannot stay in place, I mean, there's projects in New England where they're building brand new dams downstream just to hold what is in that impoundment in place. And it may ultimately come to that if things head in a different direction. We just don't know the answers at this point in time.
I think that's why eliminating the unknowns as quickly as possible is important, as well as the design process. Because we need to get a cost on it as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Super. All right, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you all for
Thank you.
coming. Thank you, Council Stevens.
Thank you.
Corey, thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thank you.
I'm sure I'll see you again.
Yes. Yeah.
Now we go to DPW director.
No, you
got actually a public hearing, so I would just do that one quick in case anyone was giving. Do you want to recess for a minute, or we can clear
Yeah,
up?
can we take a 10-minute recess?
You want to do 10 or 5?
5 minutes, fine.
Okay.
We're gonna take a 5-minute recess, and you guys can move the conversation outside. All right, we're back in session. We have a public hearing scheduled for establishment of fees under RSA 41:9-A. Who's going to close the door to cut down on the noise? The fire chief and the director of Parks and Recreation request fee changes. New Hampshire RSA 41:9A establishes the fees. The town, by majority vote at any annual or special meeting authorized by the Board of Selectmen to establish or amend fees, is provided in this section, such as a vote shall contain an effect until rescinded. Pursuant to RSA 41:9-A, the Goffstown Select Board is holding this public hearing to accept public input on a proposed update to the town's master fee schedule. Copies are available at any residence in attendance on the town's website. Recommendations of, after the public hearing, if the board concurs with the recommendation fee increases, we'll open the public hearing. Is there anybody here for the public hearing? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Motion.
I move to amend the town's master fee schedule as proposed.
Second.
Who seconded that, Richard?
Joshua.
Motion by Jim, seconded by Josh, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining, motion carries. And let's get back to the regular agenda, which is DPW director. This is the reference to single-stream recycling contract renewal.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So you have a memo in your packet, but then I'd asked Derek to keep another piece of information outside the packet, depending on what you want to do tonight. We could either talk about some of those numbers or not. Bottom line is our single-stream recycling contract. Currently, we are under contract with Casella. We bring our recycling, we self-haul, and we bring our recycling to Charlestown, Mass. Make a few runs a week. The contract was a multi-year agreement. We're now in the phase where we're year to year with them, and it renews in April, and we're at the very end of our window. They've actually extended because they were late getting me some information. They've extended the grace period, but we're basically at the point where we need to let them know if we intend to continue on in April or not. A couple options. One would be to renew. You have their information that they propose for a renewal. Another option would be to not renew and continue with them month to month and just kind of see how the recycling markets go and not lock ourselves in with anything. There's the version where we go out to bid in a sealed bid process. The problem with this particular service is right now there's only two entities that provide single stream material reclamation. So the materials recovery facility is the official term for a single stream processing plant where they actually have a factory that separates that single stream into each of these individual little streams. So different methods, but at the end they have nice products that they can market, and based on the market price of any of these commodities, that's what drives our cost down or up each month. So what we're really locking in with any of these, either of these two companies, Waste Management or Casella, are the two that offer it in our area. What we're locking in is the cost they're going to charge us as sort of a threshold. So above or below that threshold, so let's just say for sake of argument, it's a $100 threshold. If all those commodities per ton separated out are worth $110 and their threshold is set at $100, there's a $10 gap, and we split the profits between the processing plant and the town. When the recycling, when the separated commodities are worth less than that threshold, so if all those separated out and they can only make $80, we now have a net cost to the town where we have to pay the $20, make up the $20 difference between the threshold and the.
So if it's more, we split. If it's less, we got to pay the whole thing.
That's correct. So they
Heck of a deal.
build in the risk for sure. Well, we're talking about kind of the world of opportunities. There is a version, I think we've talked about it before in a few cases, where we instead shift gears and landfill our recycling. A couple problems with that, our current rates at the landfill, we pay $76 tipping fee across the scale per ton.
Per ton, yeah.
The problem is that household waste weighs more, takes up less space per ton than recycling does. Recycling's a lot lighter by weight. So they are actually working with a volume. So they're trying to not fill a landfill, but they're trying to make money filling a landfill. So if we're going to bring them something lighter per ton that takes up more space, they actually charge us a fluff factor. And that extra amount, the amount of extra volume that recycling takes up adds to it, so it actually triggers, right now we're still cheaper to recycle, I guess is a long way to say that, short way to say that. So in the short run anyway, it's still a better value proposition, bless you Derek. But the other problem with shifting gears like that is, I think as we've said before, if you ring that bell, it's very hard to unring it. So if we stop recycling, the whole town now thinks that it's not cost effective, and if you have that market swing, which they do, I provided you one of the packets. Sorry about it, Excel looks like they decided to outsmart me and change the dates to Julian dating numbers at the bottom there, but those are, each of those dots is a different monthly cost for recycling since 2022, the end of 2022. So you can see it does vary pretty widely throughout the years. We've been a few years now since we've had a revenue, but when you get a nice swing of 20 or 30 bucks a ton, I would hate for us to lose the ground we've made getting the town in the habit of recycling, for a short couple-month game maybe until the next swing. So even though it's still cheaper to recycle, if we were flirting with that number again like we have in the past, it's still a discussion to be had. It's not just a simple, hey, send everything to the landfill. So I think the decision, as I'll reiterate, the decision tonight is definitely has to be, do we want to continue on with Casella or not? And if not, then there's follow-on discussions to be had about how you want to go.
What we're looking at here, is that any guarantee time? Contract
So
length?
the Casella side, they are not willing to fix anything longer than 12 months right now, unless we were to tie it to a CPI inflationary modifier each year. The waste management offer, they are offering a 5-year agreement if we want to, at a fixed 3.5% per year on the threshold. So in hand right now, those are the two.
Josh?
Yeah, so you're saying year over year, they'd be willing to increase the cost 3.5%?
That's correct.
Okay, so so basically we're going to see an increase no matter what. But if I'm reading this properly, at least for next year, and if I did the math based upon the tonnage that we had that went there, are we looking at basically $11,000 savings for next year?
We could, if you're referring to the waste management proposal.
Potentially a savings.
Potential savings.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
There's a little bit, each plant is a little bit more specialized in certain areas. They also negotiate their own sales. So it's largely, driven by the market, the commodities market. But whatever one facility can do slightly better, they might be able to make a little bit more money on cardboard, for example, or whatever. So they don't exactly get the same market value, and the way that they, as you mentioned, with the profit sharing, Waste Management has a little bit of a different split for the commodity values than Casella does. So in the end, they come to fairly similar numbers, but the way those two companies get there are slightly different. But yes, right out of the gate, based on the numbers that we're getting from Waste Management, it will be slightly cheaper per ton.
And some of that savings is occurring because less wear and tear on the vehicles and fuel savings because it's closer.
That's correct. So yes, I gave you some additional information, and I know it's kind of baked in the cake as far as the maintenance costs of the trucks and the insurance and that kind of thing. But for sure, from a budgetary perspective, the fuel savings is a real thing, and it's going to hit the budget. And then the tipping cost, the actual fee per ton.
Can you just go over and tell me what blended value, because there's a big difference there.
Yes. So, blended value is, so each company has their own breakdown of what they might be marketing. So, for example, Casella has a couple of mixed paper categories that in the past they've marketed out that Waste Management does not. They kind of commingle some of their paper items. Their blended value, Waste Management's blended value, gives 80% of whatever the market rate is to the customer. So corrugated cardboard, for example, roughly about 60 to 65 bucks a ton the last couple months. Waste Management's structure is to give 80% of that to the customer, 80% of that 65 per ton. Whereas Casella's got a little bit more of a proprietary sharing of information, I guess is a safe way to put it. But they also, I think they include some of their cost to process, because as you notice, the processing fee is slightly lower there. I think they take some of theirs out of the average commodity revenue, which is what they call blended value. So, so it's kind of two different ways to get their built-in, their profit, for lack of a better phrase. One thing that each company, they're fairly, they're not that far apart, Billerica and Charlestown. If we were to bring in a waste stream, which we're pretty common here, being a largely municipal single stream. The last few years, everything has sort of transitioned to more paper, more cardboard. I'm sure as everybody sees what they're throwing away, less glass. There's not a whole lot of glass containers anymore. So both facilities take from a pretty large area, so they use what their facility can put out every month. So if our waste stream was significantly different from the average waste stream, it could skew some of our numbers. They do an audit, so we would get a few months on the factory's typical output breakdown between those different commodities, percentages. If all of a sudden we started bringing in a bunch of glass, which is expensive to get rid of for some reason, they would skew our revenue would be or our cost would be higher, because we'd have a higher percentage of glass than a normal customer would. But where we don't have a lot of manufacturing input, we don't have a bottling plant nearby that suddenly is going to fire up and give us a bunch of broken glass or whatever, our stream is pretty consistent. So,
kind of the bottom line, we can look at all the other stuff which is out there, but the bottom line is really the tipping fee, right? The rest of it's arbitrary. We're saying, well, this is how much we're going to save, this is how much, but the real difference is the tipping fee per trip is 120 bucks.
Yes, so, between that and fuel's a real, an actual savings on the budget. So between those two lines, yes, the budget lines of recycling fees and then fuel,
how many
it's about 140 bucks a trip.
How many trips?
3 usually is our average week. Per week. Adam, on Peter mentioned the blended value, which obviously it has variability, right? Because that's going to go up or down. How often does that change? Because it looks like the threshold fee that they're charging for Waste Management is higher by like 15 bucks or whatever, which probably breaks even on the line below a little bit on the fluctuation. How often are they fluctuating?
So with the threshold, it's fixed. With the blended value or the market value, it's month to month.
It's month to month.
Yeah.
And do we know how much volatility there's been in that over the last 12 months? For Waste Management in particular.
For Waste Management in particular, I don't have their data, but comparing current knowns from one to the other, they look like they're very similar ballparks as far as what the end result is that they're getting for some of these. So
do you have a recommendation?
I would, first off, the first decision, I would recommend that we notify Casella that we do not intend to re-up the contract in April. If the board sees some extra value in going out to bid for sealed bid numbers from these two companies, we could certainly do that. If there were 3 or 4 or 5 players, you know,
Yeah, there's 2 players.
it starts to make sense.
One of them we're already using, so.
And where both are pretty close to the same, you know, ballpark, I think the margins are what the margins are gonna be. They like, in general, they like our stream of recycling is pretty clean, we don't have a lot of residue, and a lot of, you know, that adds $100 a ton, in a, you know, in a charge when you bring a lot of, residue-laden recycling in. We have that extra set of eyes at our process, so in general, they both want us. So I think that works in our favor. My recommendation, if the board sees fit, would be to have me come back with a negotiated number from Waste Management for a multi-year contract.
2 more questions. The 3.5%, is that on the threshold processing fee, or is that the tipping fee?
It's the threshold processing fee, so.
So basically, we would see that number continue to increase 3.5% year over year for the next X number of years that you negotiate.
That's right.
And is there any ability in the market value to limit the amount of volatility in that in some sort of negotiation?
I think we would see it back in the threshold, because these are almost, for the most part, it's a direct pass-through to what, you know, the old corrugated cardboard in New England is worth X per bale. They're passing through 80% of that, you know.
I get that. I'm
so I
just saying,
think
like, we wouldn't
to
want
try
to
to-
dive down by, like, you know, 80%, because then we're going to end up paying more in that process there. So the tipping fee would be fixed for the next 5 years?
So tipping fees a monthly item. So every month they get the new market value numbers for all these commodities, and then they adjust for.
So that has volatility too.
Exactly. So this graph down below, that's a monthly change in the market value of a.
I think what I just heard from him is that he's looking for us to say no to Casella and to go out and talk to, and come back with some hard numbers from Waste Management.
I agree with that.
Okay?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
And I would just ask, because this would be a waiver of the purchasing policy by not going out, if you could add that to your motion as well.
But there's only 2.
Understood.
Would we need that now, or if I come back with some numbers and they decide to go with them?
Peter,
Either or.
why can't we get a contract from both of them, so that we have apples for apples, dollars for dollars, and we can go from there and figure out who's best or better?
Well, that's what we're talking about, more or less.
I
We
can
already
do-
have a contract with Casella.
I can do both, and similar to a closed bid, from what they're telling me anyway, you never know, you go sealed bid, sometimes people change their, you know, put their money where their mouth is, but from what Casella is saying, they will only do a multi-year if they can tie it to CPI. They don't want to be hung out with CPI's 5 and then they're stuck at the 3.5. Waste Management, probably a little hungrier to get our business at this point since we're not currently a customer, but.
Amend the motion, Jim, is what I'm hearing.
To waive the,
To waive the sealed bid process, because again, this is a pretty significant number in Adam's budget, and allow the DPW director to negotiate and bring those rates back to you.
okay, I'll move that we waive the process and allow Adam to notify Casella that we do not intend to re-up in April, and to negotiate an agreement with Waste Management for approval at a future meeting.
I still second it.
Motion by Jim, seconded by Josh. Any questions?
No, just a
Comments?
comment, Peter, is that, like, I think the fuel cost savings alone will end up being impactful, especially given how much our trucks are being utilized. I think that alone, and the fact that it's a duopoly, basically, like, we need to negotiate and get that squared away.
Don't disagree.
I can,
Now, I did get a vote on this.
oh, sorry.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, motion carries. You were going to say, Adam?
I was, just to maybe alleviate some of the concerns too about what happens if the bottom completely falls out.
Yeah.
we always want to have a way to say, we're not guaranteeing you X number of tons per year of recycling. We can always just not haul to them if landfilling becomes a way to go, or if Joe Schmo opens up a business down on 114 to accept this stuff, you know.
Just make sure we have an
So,
escape hatch.
As long as we can pull the rip.
Awesome. Anything else?
I don't, Derek's got a piece on the TA report. I don't know if you want to take it while I'm up here.
Yeah, so we didn't actually prepare a memo for this, but we have been working with Primex on the replacement of the Ford F-550. So the numbers that we're getting back from them is the actual chassis, the cash value of the chassis. Again, it was a 2020 F-550, and that is $92,342. At this point, it appears that the plow and the dump body, the physical parts of them, are still reusable. Obviously, there'll be some of the motors and hoses tied to it that'll need. So between that replacement of the chassis and the amount that needs to be done on the dump body as well as the plow, there is going to be a shortage. We're going to have to.
How much? What are we thinking?
So a little bit early, and some of it may depend on if we can try to get maybe state bid pricing on a cabin chassis, but the upfitter Viking Civis that upfit that truck a couple years ago would repurpose, it's their stuff, so they'd take it back, they'd replumb, they'd rewire, and as Derek said, the motor for the spreader would need to be fully replaced. Their quote was $53,400 to refit, presuming all the steel is good. New cylinders, that kind of stuff. So $53,400 for a refit. What we're seeing right now for F-550 diesels on the market is $67,000 to $70,000. So you're talking, 120 potentially plus short, 120 total, and then the 92 value. So it's a significant shortage.
120K short.
No.
120K total.
Like 30, 35.
So 35.
I'm confused now. I thought the cabin chassis was going to be 92.
So it's an interesting arrangement that Primex has extended. So they are telling us if it costs us more to refit, they will increase that number. The original offer is $92,342, and we can salvage whatever we want off of that vehicle.
That's for the whole thing,
That's for the whole thing.
not just the cabin chassis.
Well,
No,
they're
Primex is saying it's the
Okay, one
cabin
at a time,
chassis.
one at a time. Go ahead, Danielle.
Primex is saying it's the cabin chassis, and once they get the $53,400 invoice, they will pay that additionally. So I'm not seeing a shortage right now with the way Primex has presented the claim.
Okay, so you think we'll have enough?
Yep.
You have some,
for a cabin chassis that I can buy for $67,000, that's why the number is shocking that they would give us 92 just for the cabin chassis. But that's, Danielle asked them and they reiterated, so it's,
All right.
I guess I
Okay,
would
so as of
proceed,
this,
but-
as it looks at this time, it's not going to cost us anything.
As far as we understand it right now, I've gone back and forth with them by email a few times to make sure that I get it confirmed.
yeah,
And so far, that's what they've reiterated, is that they're standing firm on that.
okay.
Awesome.
When will we know final?
As soon as we
I
get
guess
into
as soon
the
as
process,
Adam finds a chassis that meets their
the spec.
specifications.
So that's the second half of the conversation. How would you like us to proceed with that? We've got, as a reminder, we have, unfortunately not the same truck, we have another 550 that's in the 2026 proposed budget, within the budget itself. We could try to work with any local Ford dealer to grab a lot vehicle now. We could go out to bid for one. We could go out to bid for two and say maybe this will turn into one if the budget fails, because the timing is basically at this point going to sort of line up with that.
We only got a month.
Yeah. The upfitter said that they right now are filling their March 2027 build window.
Would that be the same for salvaging off March 27th?
That's just to get your slot in there,
So both trucks would be available to 27 anyway.
from the sounds of it. The only huge benefit, and maybe even not huge, I don't want to overstate it, but the only real benefit to trying to work directly with someone for at least the insurance vehicle is that potentially, if there are a handful of towns or cities that are buying F-550s, we would potentially get a truck before everyone's town meeting happens, and then now everybody else is also looking for the same thing, but I don't know if that's a huge benefit or not. There are some 25s that are still out there available. The state bid number is only 63.5. If any of them would honor the state bid for the 2025 bid, which is actually, windows closed for orders, but if they still have one, they might be able to. We would save a couple grand there, in which case we'd be within the purchasing policy because it's state bid pricing. I would just come to you with that recommendation.
Why don't we do that?
Yeah, I think we should do that.
Why don't you look for,
See if
they
they'll
got a
jump on it.
25, they're replacing a 20, I mean,
Okay. So if they'll hop on that, that would at least let us get a vehicle quick, get it to Viking, and then
Start getting them rolling.
if, for whatever reason, if they're, oh, hey, we could work on this in between, or if they lose an order or something, it may be
Do we need a motion for
sooner
that,
than
or?
March.
No, you don't need a motion. No, we don't need a motion. I think the direction is clear.
Yeah.
all right, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Al.
Yeah,
Town administrators
one I never
report,
wanted to deal with, but
tab 7.
hey, here we are.
At tab 7A, you have your consent agenda. You have employee status reports. You have a per diem PEG technician. This is a new hire. You have a per diem firefighter 2 EMT. This is a new hire. You have a full-time firefighter A EMT, successful completion of probationary period, and the the deputy fire chief, new hire. You have a proclamation in your packet, and then also the 2025 audit select board questionnaire. Thank you for those that provided feedback on that form.
Motion,
Motion to,
Go ahead.
motion to approve the consensus agenda as presented.
Second?
motion by Mark, seconded by Josh. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Go ahead.
At tab 7B, you have a proposal from the Information Systems Director. One of the things that he's been working on for a long time is to try and get our Microsoft licensing down a little bit. Currently, we have Office 365 licensing for our users, and we pay it on a month-to-month basis. The annual cost is approximately $61,400 and change. So what this proposal would be is, starting with March 1, would be to move it to an annual cost of Microsoft 365 rather than Office 365. There are some advantages. It gives us a little bit more SharePoint storage, as well as some of the security features that would be included. We would be fully within our budgeted amount for this year, and then we would see the savings in 2026. We have reviewed the contract. There is a municipal non-appropriation clause in the contract. Should we lose the appropriation in the operating budget for future years. So the request is to move towards and just to touch on, Dell Technologies has the state of New Hampshire contract for all software. So this would basically be changing from month to month for Office 365 for systems engineering to an annual Microsoft 365 through Dell Technologies in the state contract.
Derek, what's the annual increase on this one? Like after we get going, is there like a set increase?
Is there a set increase? Percent each year. It's the same percentage?
What's that percentage?
There is no
Is there a
increase.
percentage increase, or are we subject to the Microsoft? It's locked in for 3 years.
So we're locked in for the price year over year for 3 years?
Yeah.
Okay, and then we have to renegotiate after that 3 years?
Which would be normal.
Okay.
Motion?
So we're purchasing off of a state contract, so they're the ones that do the negotiating. We're just the beneficiary of the purchasing power that they have that we don't.
And so, Brian, when I read through the contract, I see that we're gonna get E3 and E5, so we don't have those today for cybersecurity?
So we have Office E3.
Yeah.
And Office F1, which is a lower license, or F3, hold on. I wanna make sure I'm using it right. So we have Office F3 and Office G3. Those don't have conditional access rules, they don't have any advanced security with Defender or any of those. So by moving to the Microsoft licensing, we get all that for every user. Right now, we're purchasing those Office licenses and purchasing an additional endpoint security license for our mobile users. So we're buying 2 licenses where we can just buy one and have it all in.
Was that accounted for the savings, or are you actually gonna get more savings because we'll get more capabilities as we move forward?
So the savings that it's a savings right out the gate, so we're able to get better pricing. Additionally, I won't have to buy server Cal licensing.
So we may get savings there too?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. What about because I have heard complaints, I've asked, are we gonna get the Office license for people to store, like, put on locally, or do they still have to all use the online version
So
of
the
the software?
F3 licenses are a frontline license, which is browser only. We have moved a lot of users to the G3 licensing.
Yep.
You saw the user count there. We're at 100 and 100. Police department is on the G3.
Yep.
They move into the cruisers, out of the cruisers, so they have that software installed locally. Some of the other users don't, because a lot of it is cloud-based now. It is definitely a workflow adjustment.
Yep.
We've worked through some of that, but we could look at it down the road. At this point, it's a cost.
Okay, well, I mean, if we get additional savings, maybe for some of the users that are having problems, maybe we can at least work through that.
Yeah, it was definitely a couple years ago when we went through the switch, it was definitely a switch, and we did actually kind of re-tier some of those employees as needed.
Yeah, I think our original numbers, like, we had 150 at the F3 license and 50 at the G3, and we realized that really was not working for a lot of users, so we moved them up to the G3.
Yeah, I looked it through the deal, it looked great to me.
Motion then?
I'll make a motion to move from monthly Office 365 licensing with Systems Engineering to annual Microsoft 365 licensing with Dell Technologies under the State of New Hampshire contract, and to further authorize the town administrator to sign the enterprise enrollment agreement.
Seconded. Motion by Josh, seconded by Richard. Any discussion or further questions? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Motion carries.
The next item at tab 7C, you have a revised, it's the AI policy that you saw in November. It's now titled the IT Workplace Use of Artificial Intelligence Policy. At your November 24th meeting, the board asked for an approved list of AI tools. That will not be a static, that'll be something that's maintained by IT as we are seeing those tools come out. I did provide you with the current list that we have. A defined log retention policy, and then also clarification that it's intended solely for work-related activities. So what you have in your packet is a clean version, as well as a red line to kind of show where we made those changes from what you saw in November. And we can answer questions for the board, and we'll be ultimately looking to have this adopted.
I have no more questions, it looks great.
Get out, okay, let's go.
Come on.
I make a motion to approve it as presented.
Second.
Motion by Josh, seconded by Jim. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Motion carries.
And even the policy, I assume, is gonna be something that we're gonna look at from time to time.
Yeah, this one we're probably gonna have to look at more frequently than on a year-to-year basis, just because things are changing so fast.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian, for the extra work on that.
At tab 7D, you have in front of you, I did send out by email today, you have in front of you a draft copy of the town's voter's guide. DPW did send me some additional information to add to it with regards to the DPW curbside Packer, the request for that appropriation. There were some questions at the deliberative session about what those 4 vehicles, that fleet actually looks like, so thank you to DPW for sending over that information.
And just be looking for feedback from the board either this evening or in next coming days so that we can send this out. The school has sent over their information on Friday and this morning. We'll be incorporating that into the final 3 pages, and then we have to send it off to the printer so that we can get it and get it out to residents.
I'll double check the rest of it by tomorrow.
Yeah, so if everybody could just look at it, and if anyone has any major heartburn. Most of the items for the zone, so the zoning article explanations were all provided by Joanne in the planning office. Article 9, which is the operating budget, all the way through Article 17, which is the town, the select board proposed. Those were very similar to the bullet points that we used in the deliberative session handout. And then the petition articles, we really just provide that they were certified by the supervisor of the checklist. And then on the 2 that were amended at the deliberative session, we will just indicate that they're amended at the deliberative session. People will have to do a little bit of research on those 2, kind of on their own.
You do need a motion for this though, Derek, right?
Yeah, so a motion to approve the voters' guides, and with the caveat that any typos or anything the board brings to our attention, we can make those corrections.
Yeah, because there was one typo and I think.
There's one on 16 too, it says the members, all one word.
Yeah. So I'm happy to.
You fix that 19 and 17?
Yeah, the 17 needs to be changed to 19.
Yep.
And I assume we can, I'll make a motion to approve the voter's guide with any necessary changes relative spelling and grammar and correct article numbers as outlined.
Motion by Josh, seconded by Richard. Any further discussion or questions? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained? Motion carries. Do we have any new business to be brought before the board? And old business, we got back in service, 6-wheel dump, 550 plow, we're working with Primex on it. The other 550 plow,
Yeah, I
rear
was gonna say
brake.
there's 2 550s down.
Yeah. The other 550 plow, rear brakes, hubs in-house next week for rear leaf springs at Donovan. And then a 6-wheel dump, Allegiance Truck Center, hard starting issue, possibly the week of 2/9, which is this week. Any questions on any of that? Seeing none, is there anybody here for public comment? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment. We have any non-public?
We do have one item in your packet for non-public. It's under B, hiring.
I make a motion, we go into non-public session, RSA 91A:32 for hiring.
Second.
Roll call.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
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 That'll conclude tonight's public portion of our meeting.
And who had the second? Was it?
Me.
Thank you. Sorry.
We'll now be going into non-public. Thank you for those who are watching.
And here.
Yeah.